Hello everyone, my name is Ken Widener. I'm a nurse at Lancaster General Hospital on 8 Lyme, which is a medical surgical oncology floor. And today I'm going to present the topic of staffing and scheduling for nurses and nurse managers. So 3 reasons why staffing and scheduling are so important is for patient safety, which I will show some of the statistics about how staffing can negatively impact patient safety. Staffing and scheduling is also important for nurse safety as well as nurse satisfaction. And lastly, staffing and scheduling are important in this financially driven world that we are being financially efficient with staffing and scheduling. So some things that you would want to ask yourself as a nurse manager or as a nurse is what clinical area am I working in? Just like every patient is different and individualized, every setting is going to be different. Even one medical surgical floor versus another medical surgical floor, they're going to have different needs. So some things you would want to ask, is my clinical area 24/7, 365? Is it Monday through Friday, 8 to 4? Does it have some Saturday hours? Does it require weekends and holidays? Is the census lower on holidays, lower on weekends? Does that not change at all? Are there no peaks on weekends or holidays? One example that I could use from 8 Lyme is our flap mastectomy patients. The plastic surgeons from Penn always come on Friday to do those surgeries, and those patients require a 3-to-1 nurse ratio for the first 48 hours. So that's something that's unit specific to the area in which I work that another med-surg floor at Lancaster General Hospital would not have to consider. Just keeping those things in mind. Again, every unit, every clinical area is going to be different than any other clinical area. Additional questions you would want to ask: does the nursing delivery model that you follow, or does your institution allow for licensed practical nurses? From my understanding, none of the floors at Lancaster General Hospital do use LPNs as part of their staffing mix. They are, however, assigned to different roles, such as IV team. Some nursing models require a mostly RN staff, such as the primary care nursing model. Is that the model that your clinical area follows? And then, does every shift have adequate experience, mix, and education? An example again from 8 Lyme would be we have to always have at least one chemo certified nurse at the hospital 24/7. That's actually for 2 reasons. One is in case there were an emergent need to give a chemotherapy, biotherapy medication, which is very rare, but some patients' conditions require that it be given in order to save or prolong their life. The other reason is we're also the chemotherapy, biotherapy spill response team should there be a spill there. Also, there's members from pharmacy, but you always have to have at least one chemo nurse at the hospital. Then you'd want to ask, when is it beneficial to have more patient care assistants or less patient care assistants? From my experience, day shift is busy. They try to get most of the baths done. So we usually try to get 3 to 4, eventually 5 patient care assistants is our goal of our 5-1-1 staffing model. Certainly overnight, it feels like we could use more than 2, but our goal is to have 2 patient care assistants. Lately, our unit has had pretty much 25, 26 patients, which is our capacity. So it's been beneficial to have 2 or more patient care assistants. Some other things you want to consider: does your clinical care area frequently need cognitive coaches for patients? And if so, does the organization contract with an outside agency to provide cognitive coaches, or do they have a student nurse pool that can provide cognitive coaches? These are all questions you would want to know if you were a nurse manager or a staff nurse or a charge nurse going into each and every shift. So Menzik 2014 laid out the 3 staffing models. The first is budget-based, which is staffing based on nursing hours per patient day. The second is nurse-to-patient ratio, which is a designated number of nurses per number of patients. Also, they recommend or suggest that some institutions, as opposed to using that specific ratio, they do number of patient days. They make a ratio using a number of patient days as opposed to a specific number of nurses. And then the third one is patient acuity, which is a patient acuity system used to determine assignments and staffing needs. And certainly the best option is going to be use some form of combination of all 3 of these staffing models. Also, Menzik 2014 mentions variability, such as artificial variability. In the first class would be surgical schedule. Are ortho surgeries occurring more on Monday, that census is higher on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Friday they leave? Another example from 8 Lyme, we do some chemotherapy infusions that require inpatient admission. Those typically tend to be on Tuesday and Thursdays. Certainly, if we know we would have a lot coming up, we would seek to spread them out so that we're not having so many patients coming in as direct admissions to receive chemotherapy on the same day. And while I'm not too familiar with this, I know the critical care units, when their providers round, it seems like there's a certain time of day when they're transferring patients out of critical care in the early afternoon period. So those are all artificial variabilities. Those are things that the administration, hospital, doctors, nurses, that they can control to some extent. Natural variability, on the other hand, is broken up into clinical, which would be flu season, a natural disaster, mass casualty events, according to Sullivan 2018, alcohol-related illnesses, that 12 to 4 o'clock time of night for the emergency department. Those are things that we can't control, but we can potentially plan for or have a plan in place should they happen. And then professional variability is, does one physician group come in at 6 o'clock and is ready to discharge a patient, or another physician group doesn't come until afternoon, so patients are sitting around waiting to be discharged? Those types of things. Are there advanced practice providers that are helping with rounding? Those types of areas where the nurses, the doctors, the multidisciplinary team have variances in their schedule or their approach, which is either delaying or expediting patient flow and patient care. So staffing laws has certainly been a hot topic, has always been a hot topic. The only federal law or legislation is that Medicare participating hospitals must have adequate number of licensed RNs. So the term adequate is obviously open for interpretation. Every hospital, every institution can devise their own way to show that they have an adequate number of RNs. It's nothing set in stone. On the right, you'll see some of the states that have legislation. They require committees responsible for staffing plans and policies, or they require disclosure or public reporting of staffing. And then lastly, California is the only state with nurse-to-patient ratio legislation, and it varies based on the unit and the clinical area. So some considerations for staffing is, does your institution, does your clinical area, does it have a staffing committee? Does it have staffing plans? Certainly always encourage creativity. What are some ways we can improve how we are staffing 10-hour shifts as opposed to 12-hour shifts, or as opposed to 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7? Should there be some overlap during the busiest times of day? That extra hour, is it worth the cost? Maybe nurses come in at 6 or nurses come in at 2 and then overlap with the nurses that are already there. Maybe that expedites report, so nurses who are working 12-hour shifts get out after working 12 hours and not staying for the additional hour for report and charting. Just those creative ideas that can help improve staffing, they should always be considered and not shot down. So some numbers, I myself never fully understood how the FTEs worked in relationship to the bigger picture. So the NDNIQ, it's RN hours per patient day, says that a medical unit, the 50th percentile of medical unit, requires 5.88 hours per patient day. The RN is going to provide 5.88 hours per patient day. So the formula that was provided in the article by Dent 2015 is saying 5.88 RN hours per patient day times 38 patients, the max capacity, times 365 days a year, divided by the 9% non-productive time, divided by, so the 1872 is a 0.9 FTE employee, shows that clinical area needs 47.9 total FTEs. And obviously they recommend accounting in FTEs for onboarding, which is you're always going to have turnover. So as opposed to reacting to the turnover, you start hiring employees in that onboarding role so that when someone does leave, someone to replace them is already coming up. So some principles, again, is Dent recommends having a staffing council, a hospital-wide or organizational-wide staffing council, self-scheduling with the manager's ability to negotiate to fill in holes or for other units to fill in holes. They recommend electronic scheduling so that the holes are clearly seen and can be picked up. Fatigue management. The article recommended no more than 12.5-hour days, no more than 3 12-hour shifts in a row, no more than 60 hours in a 7-day period. Also looking at, do you have an internal resource team? At LGH, we call that our supplemental staff. How are they staffed? How are they used? What does their skill set look like? Versus external, which is travel nurse agencies. Is there a certain time of year where they would be beneficial to cover, say, flu season? Acuity-based assignments. I know at LGH our doc flow sheets and Epic does have an acuity tool. However, it's not really used. We kind of just rely on reporting to our charge nurse to say, hey, I have a heavy section, this patient's heavy for this reason or that reason. But it does make it hard to communicate to the supervisors, because like I said, we have patients who are at higher risk for reactions getting chemotherapy that another unit doesn't have. So how do we communicate that acuity to the house-wide staff? Onboarding, as I already mentioned, hiring people to account for turnover. You want to vary your experience and staffing mix, your PTCAs, your unit clerk, your RNs, your 1-year experience, your 5-year experience, or 10-year experience. And if overtime is required, it's best to distribute it evenly. Even if someone is volunteering to take it all, don't allow them to, because that leads to errors and burnout. So some statistics that I found, staph aureus epidemics were found related to nurse fatigue, working long hours, increased emergency department visits related to overtime hours, 12-hour shifts responsible for a 12% absentee in a recent study. And this is just a vicious cycle. You work 12 hours, and then someone calls off, and then someone else is required to work 12 hours, and then that person's calling off. It's just a cyclic issue that just keeps building on itself because of that. Increase in needle stick injuries, nurses working 12 versus 8-hour shifts, increased risk for musculoskeletal injuries, drowsy driving. I know certainly I used to have an hour commute working night shift. That was an issue for me. Thankfully never led to any incident happening, but I can certainly relate to that. Increased experience of nursing was related to a decrease in med error and patient falls. And then the one stat that I've seen over and over again is that every additional patient assigned, there's a 7% increase in failure to rescue and a 7% increase of a patient dying within 30 days of admission. So this video real quick talks about a nurse who went out of her way to advocate for her unit to develop a acuity-based staffing tool to prompt better staffing on her unit. And these are my references. Thank you.